All right. Good Friday afternoon. Hey, AnnieLaurie.
Hey, how are ya?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good. Doing good. My
All
kids are
right.
downstairs watching The Greatest Showman, so I feel like the floor is vibrating from the music.
That's a great movie. My kids love the soundtrack. That's a great story.
Yeah, every time the songs come on, they turn it up as loud as it'll go.
Well, welcome to our guests, to those that are watching us live, and to those who are going to join us on the recording or on our podcast. Welcome. Happy Friday. We're glad you're with us. And maybe we just gave you a movie idea for after this, of course, the Greatest Showman. It's a great show. Well, AnnieLaurie, we've got some fun things to talk about today. If you're joining us, then we are going to be talking today about how do you communicate clearly? How do you clarify your marketing message? This is important whether you own a business, whether you work in a larger company and you're communicating to other people, the other departments, and especially for nonprofits, it's important to be able to communicate clearly to their donors, their supporters, their volunteers. And so we're going to be diving into three things today that really can help you clarify your message, communicate clearly, because really clarity is a competitive advantage. We want to avoid confusion at all costs. So we're going to get into that here in just a couple of minutes. Before we do, I'm Steve Phipps. I'm the founder and president of Wayfind Marketing, and my co-host is AnnieLaurie, who is also part of the Wayfind team. And a couple of different things we just want to let you know about. If you're joining us for the first time, if you've been with us previously, then we're glad to have you. Each of these shows is recorded and posted to the Wayfind Marketing YouTube channel, so you can find past episodes there. We also, this week, AnnieLaurie, which we've started a new thing. We've started a daily marketing tip, and this is a video that we're posting on all the social channels. You'll find those on YouTube. You'll find those on the Wayfind Marketing website. So again, resources. We're really trying to do two things with business owners and nonprofit leaders. And number one is we really want to encourage, and then number two is equip. Those are two things that for us are just crucial things that we feel like need to be done in the business and the nonprofit world. And so that's what we want to do today. AnnieLaurie, why don't you tee it up for us a little bit to kind of give a little bit of a teaser of what we're going to be jumping into?
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about story today and why story matters. When you spend any time with Steve Phipps, you'll hear him talk about story and that why story is a really useful tool to help you clearly communicate effectively about who you are, what you do in a way that's really memorable that people will remember. And I think that ever since we started employing some of the proven framework that comes along with understanding story and how it works, we've seen a real uptick in traffic and leads for our clients. So I'm really excited for us to be able to start sharing some of this today on the live stream today.
Absolutely. Well, one other thing I want to say before we jump in, if you're on Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to ask questions, make comments. We can respond to those. We'd be happy to do that. The other thing is towards the end of this episode, if anybody would like us to, we will do a live review of a website, preferably yours, not your competitors, but just to give some feedback, some ideas on how you can improve your website to communicate more clearly. So I'll mention that now. Let's go ahead and jump in.
Great.
The first thing we want to talk about, there's three things that we want to talk about today. So number one is, how do you know what your customers need right now? Because really, if we're going to communicate clearly, We need to know what is it they need, what's the pain, what's the frustration that they have, and what they're dealing with, what they're facing right now looks a lot different, most likely, than what it did 3 or 4 weeks ago. And as quickly as things are changing right now, it may look different 3 to 4 weeks from now. So it's really important now more than ever to really be in tune with your customers, with your audience. Now, the second thing that we're going to talk about is story and the structure of story, and how that is a great resource. It's a great mechanism for communicating to your audience in a way that's compelling. It's in a way that connects with what they're facing and positions you, your business, your brand, your organization as the guide who can help them experience success. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is creating what we call a one-liner. And so this is where we're going to get to the equipping part. And this is going to be tactical, hands-on. This is, get a pen and a piece of paper, a notebook, get your iPad, wherever you take notes, because we're going to go through some very practical things that you can do to create a simple message that is clear, it is compelling, and it differentiates you from your competitors. So the first thing we'll come back to is, how do you know what your customers are dealing with right now? Our customers, and AnnieLaurie, we talk about this a lot. Your customers are in a story. We all live in narrative, and we're all facing problems and challenges. And as a business or a nonprofit, you have an opportunity to serve your clients, to serve your donors, your volunteers. And you have an ability, an option to serve them in a way that helps make their life better, that solves a problem. And so there are some practical things that can be done in order to do that. Number one is pick up the phone and call some of your clients, call some of your customers. Now, if you're starting out and you were to say, Steve and Laurie, I don't have existing customers, that's okay, because the chances are you probably know people who are potential customers. You probably know people who fit the description of who you want to be serving, who you want to be doing business with. And so have a conversation with them, but find out directly from them, hey, what are the challenges that you're facing right now in context of your service or your product? And then listen and hear what they're saying back to you. Now, AnnieLaurie, you've had the opportunity to be a part of those kinds of conversations. We do a lot of research. We do a lot of these kinds of conversations for our clients. What are your thoughts in terms of reaching out and having some of those conversations, and why those are so important?
Well, I think that people need to understand how what you're doing applies to them. And in order for you to communicate how what you do applies to them, you have to understand their needs. And so a lot of times we want to communicate kind of from this first person perspective of who we are and what we do and what our features are. But we really have to flip that and start talking about it in terms of the benefit to the person that we're trying to connect with. Because if we're just over here talking all the time about our features and what we're great at, if the customer or the lead doesn't see how that really impacts their own story, then they're just going to keep moving by. People are sort of, I hate to say it, but kind of by nature, we're a little self-centered, and we want to know how what's this mean to me? So what? How does this matter in my context? So the more we can communicate around the context of the customer, the better a chance of them grabbing onto what it is we do and how it can help them succeed in their own story.
Something that you said that I think is really good is the question that people are going to ask, and sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously, is, so what?
Right.
And you're absolutely right. If I'm trying to explain to somebody what we do, well, the question is, well, so what? Why does it matter to me? And so if you think about who your audience is, they're asking you that question. And really the best way to answer that is by asking them, having conversations. And this seems simplistic. It seems obvious, but 9 times out of 10 people that we talk to, they've not had those conversations. Maybe they're talking to their customers, but a lot of times they're not actually sitting down and picking up the phone and saying, hey, tell me about what's going on. Like, what are the challenges you're facing right now? What's that making you feel? What is that keeping you from accomplishing? What have you tried to overcome that? And so so we think about equipping people. Think about those are the kinds of questions that you could be asking people. And so for our audience who's listening and watching this, those are the kinds of questions. Write that down. If you've got that piece of paper, if you've got your iPad, whatever, take some notes down. Just simply saying, hey, what's the pain that you're feeling right now? What are the biggest challenges and frustrations that you're facing? And again, you want this in context of the service that you provide. And if you find out that right now they don't have pain points or significant pain points around your product or service, especially the environment that we're in right now, then maybe you can connect them to someone who can help. So maybe your role right now is not to be the one that comes in with the solution. Maybe you're the one that connects them to the person who has the solution.
And that just further solidifies the relationship. And, at the end of the day, it's all boils back down to the relationships that we can continue investing in during this time, where some of us may feel like we're on pause. Like, just continuing to invest in building those relationships, I think is a key takeaway in what we're talking about as well.
Absolutely.
Also, a lot of times we think we know what people need and we think we know what they want. Then when we ask them, the answer is often very different than what we thought it was.
Yeah. It's, one of the things, and I'll say this, and then we'll go ahead and dive into story a little bit more, because that's really a big piece of this. When you have these conversations, and as I mentioned, we have a lot of these conversations. We do this for a lot of our clients where we're doing phone interviews. We're also doing online surveys, because what happens is we can have thoughts and ideas about what our customers and clients need. And we might be spot on. We might know exactly what it is, but until we have those conversations, we're just guessing, really. And when we have those conversations, when we ask those questions, then what that does is one of three things. One, it affirms it that, hey, we are on target. Number two, as you said, a lot of times we come up with new things. These are new ideas. Or maybe there's something about what we do that helps them in a way that they value that we didn't realize. Maybe we didn't think it was that big of a deal, but to our customers, it is. And then the third thing is that sometimes what happens is it identifies issues. It identifies where there are problems. And we've had this happen on several occasions where we had to go back to our client and say, hey, look, here's a concern that your customers and your audience have. And it doesn't make sense to roll out new marketing or new messaging or new branding until you solve this problem, because otherwise you're just going to be wasting money because there's this big issue out here. So those are the three outcomes that we see pretty regularly for doing those conversations. Now, AnnieLaurie, tell me, you've had the opportunity to learn about story. Of course, you've been doing stories since college. And so what have you seen in terms of story and why that concept of story works, and why is that something that we're big fans of?
Well, because it's memorable, and you can look at this from a bunch of different ways, but one aspect of story that I've always found pretty compelling is how our brains are wired to remember stories with mirroring neurons in our brains, that when you're sharing a story and it's evoking an emotion, like you're mirroring the person who's sharing the story, this is making an impression in your mind. And that impression that it makes, it gives it more roots in your memory than when you're just seeing like bullets or like a long list of just like boring facts. When it's packaged in this story, that the emotion piece is so important, connecting on an emotional level, it does something different in our brains to help us remember it. That tactic is used in education, can be used in marketing, it's used in entertainment all the time. So
Yeah.
I think that the science behind it's very compelling. And I think we have some resources about that we could share in our show notes when we load this up in the post production, just to point to some of the different aspects of why story is so compelling, that if anybody wants to do a little further reading, they'd have the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. And I'll I'll share a resource here in just a couple of minutes as one of the practical things that someone can do. So you mentioned this, but there is a structure to story. Now, I think sometimes when people hear the idea of using story as a part of marketing, it's easy to dismiss that. It's almost like, yeah, stories, that's great, but I sell industrial equipment. What kind of story is there to that? Well, we're not talking like fluffy bunnies and fairy tale stories. We're talking about the structure of story, and people a lot smarter than me have studied this. And what they found is that there is a specific structure. There's a pattern to story. And when we can apply that to marketing, when we apply that to messaging, all we're doing is we're taking this structure that our brains are hardwired to understand, and we're making it easy for our customers to grasp what we do, because we're laying it out with a structure and a flow that their brains go, oh, I know what you're trying to tell me. It fits. It makes sense. And so we use a framework called StoryBrand. Now, some of you guys may be familiar with StoryBrand. It was based on a book. It's a framework developed by a guy named Donald Miller. And he wrote a book a few years ago called How to Build a Story Brand. And it's a 7-part framework. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. If I'll mention this, if anybody who's watching or listening, if you want to learn more about this structure, let me know. I would love to have a conversation. In fact, I'll toss it up there now. Let me get to the right place here. I'll toss my email up there. So if you have questions about the structure of story, feel free to shoot me an email. And for our listeners, it's steve@wayfindmarketing.com. Because it's a great structure. But the 7-part structure, number one, we start with a hero. Who's the customer? The hero of the story always wants, there's something they want. And so we'll use Harry Potter as an example. Harry is the hero of the story. Well, there's always a problem, which in his case is Voldemort. It's the enemy who's represents evil and basically is trying to conquer the world. And there's always a problem, and something that's worth noting, because this is important when we think about creating a one-liner in just a little bit. The problem exists at a couple of different levels. There's the obvious problem, but there's what's also called the internal problem. And that's really where we can start connecting, because that's the emotional side of things. And something that we want to consider is that the part of the brain that makes decisions is the same part of the brain that controls emotion. So when we can connect with people emotionally, not manipulating emotions, but when we genuinely can connect at that emotional level, then that creates more opportunities to connect and ultimately to move people forward. So hero, the customer, Harry Potter has a problem. But then the character meets a guide. The guide is the character in the story. He's actually the strongest character in the story. The guide is the one who has a solution, has the means to help the hero overcome the problem and ultimately experience success. And so in Harry Potter, Dumbledore is the primary guide. He is the one who has the plan to help Harry eventually defeat Voldemort. If you haven't watched the movies and I just ruined it for you, I'm sorry. The movies and the books have been out for years, so you've had time. So meets a guide. The guide has a plan. We lay out the plan, and then the guide calls the hero to act, because a lot of times there's sort of a reluctance, and what we want to do is make it easy. And so we want to invite them to move forward. Now, when that happens, then we begin to paint the picture of what success looks like. And that's what we're painting the picture of. What does life look like? Here's how I can help you solve the problem. And here's what it looks like. Here's the outcome. This is what you're going to experience if you work with me, if you buy my service or product. And by contrast, we're helping them avoid failure. So we want to paint that picture because we want to communicate, hey, we understand what the problem is. We understand what the outcome is if you don't solve that problem. So that's a 7-part framework. And there's a lot more to it in terms of fleshing that out. But a resource that I want to share, and I'm going to put this up on the screen. If you are interested in kind of mapping out your messaging, because that's what we're focused on today, is how do you clarify your marketing message so that you can win more customers and outrun your competitors? Well, you've got to have clarity. You've got to be able to communicate in a way that people, they grasp it, they understand it, and they're compelled by it. Well, when you begin to lay out the story using that 7-part framework, then that's going to put you in a position to be able to communicate clearly. And so the 7-part framework, the character has a problem, meets a guide who has a plan, who calls the hero to act, to experience success, and to avoid failure. If you go to this website, this is mystorybrand.com, mystorybrand.com. If you go there, you can create a free account. And this is an online tool to be able to create what's called a brand script. And so that's the 7 parts. There's videos there where Donald Miller teaches more about each of those components. The other thing that you can do is get a copy of the book, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And again, if anybody has questions about this, I'm happy to have a conversation. Feel free to message me. If you drop a note in the comments right now if you have questions. But this is a great resource. It doesn't cost anything to create this account. And again, as you begin to dive into this, it's just, story is a sense-making device.
Let me ask you a question real quick. In terms of the framework and the story brand, especially thinking about the customer's the hero, like when it comes to communicating in that framework, what's one of the number one mistakes that you see people make?
I would say probably the biggest mistake is going too broad. Because when we're thinking about the story that our customers are in, a lot of times a brand company will have multiple services or multiple products. And so really there's a lot of things that they can do. There's a lot of ways that they can help their clients and customers. And so the risk is to try to communicate all of those things in all this detail, when in reality, the priority is start out with the big picture. Start out with your overall brand. What's the problem that you solve? Like there's going to be a consistent problem, because typically those products and services are going to be related to each other. And you want to boil it down to what is that single problem that your customers are facing, and what's the single thing that they want that you can help them solve. And as you begin to do this at a big level, then you can start to drill it in. And then you take that same framework. And so let's say somebody has 3 different service lines. What they could do is, again, do the overall brand, but then they could start to drill in more and do that same process, do a brand script for each of the individual brands, or each of the individual service lines rather. And again, those would be in context. The overall story doesn't change, but what happens is we go into more of a micro story for each of those service lines. That's a great question.
That's an important takeaway too, is just to remember that no matter what your business is, even if your business is one that you don't think just naturally lends itself to story, you solve a problem. And if you can identify how to communicate that, then you will be able to communicate what you do within a story framework.
Well, absolutely. And I'll one more point that I'll make based on what you just said is when we talk about story, we're not talking about fluffy bunnies and unicorns.
Right.
Like, I think that's a lot of times when people hear story, they immediately think, oh, like fairy tale and things like that. And what we're talking about is the structure of story, because every brand, every business, this framework can work for solopreneurs. This framework works for Fortune 100 companies. It's just, again, it's the structure of story that has existed for millennia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So we've talked through getting to know your customer, knowing what they need now. We've talked about the story structure, that framework that gives you the seed bed of what you need in order to create clear, compelling messaging. And one of the things I want to mention is because I want to talk about the one-liner. And the one-liner is just a simple, practical way that you can tell people what you do based on the structure of story so that people are interested. Our brains are wired to do two things. And science has shown this. And so I'm not making this kind of stuff up. I'm not smart enough to do that. Survive and thrive. That is what our brains are wired to do. Our brains are focused on, what do I need to do to make it through the day? Now, it used to be a lot more so than it is today for most of us that survival was, hey, how am I going to avoid being eaten by this wild animal? Or where can I go hunt an animal so I can eat today? And so survival literally meant survival. Now, for a lot of us, survival is, how do I get through the day without wasting a bunch of time in traffic? So it looks different now than it used to, but again, your product, your service can help people survive in some cases, sort of save time, save money, fundamental things like that. Other times, what your business or service or product can do is help people thrive. How do you help them become a better version of themselves? Or luxury brands are very much aspirational. Yes, a $50,000 car is going to get you places. Well, so can the $5,000 car. So if it's just purely transportation that we're looking for, I don't need a $50,000 car to do that. A bike can get me there, but there's an aspiration that goes along with it. There's other things that come along with that are more about thriving. And so I want to make that point. And the other thing is, when we think about a story, the crux of any story is the problem. If there's no problem, then there's not a story. I mean, think about a movie that you can't think of a story that doesn't have a problem. Mm-hmm. And the folks out in Hollywood know that they have to introduce a significant problem that has a significant consequence if it's not solved within the first 10 minutes of a movie. Mm-hmm. And so with your audience, with your customers, the one-liner, so we're finally getting there. So I know, Steve, land the plane. Okay, we're going to land the plane. Here's the structure of the one-liner: problem, solution, and success, or result, or benefit. Okay. Now, here's how this plays out. And that's the one-liner. That's the one-liner structure: the problem, solution, result. Now, some of you may be going, okay, Steve, that's it. Well, yeah, that's it. The reason that this works is because when we introduce a problem, again, our brains are wired for story, then immediately it opens what's called a story loop. Our brains want to know, how are you going to solve this problem? AnnieLaurie, I didn't think to ask you this before we started this, but what are a couple of the movies that your kids really enjoy watching?
Star Wars.
Okay.
All the Star Wars.
Okay, Star Wars. So perfect example. There's a huge problem in Star Wars. And we learn very quickly on that the bad guys, Darth Vader and those guys, are wanting to take over the world, or not the world, the galaxy. And Luke, who's the hero, is now faced with having to do battle. And of course, he's guided by Obi-Wan and Yoda. Now, our kids love stories like Toy Story and Cars. And each of these movies, again, each of these stories, if you go to something like Hunger Games, they all have a problem. Nobody's going to be interested in watching Harry Potter if all that happens when Voldemort takes over is it's going to rain a lot. There's nothing compelling about that. So anyway, I probably rambled way too long on that. But when you introduce your service to somebody, start with the problem. So here's how this could work. When, let's say you're at an event, we'll say this is a couple of months from now when we're all back out and about again, and you go to a networking event and you walk up to somebody, you walk up to Sue and you say, "Hey, Sue, tell me what you do." And Sue says, "Well, you know what? I'm an at-home chef." Okay. So you're clear. You know what Sue does. She's an at-home chef. But there's really nothing. Well, anyway, I'm going to keep my thoughts there for a second. Now, let's say 30 minutes later, you go up to Ken. "Hey, Ken, I'm Steve. Tell me, what do you do, Ken?" Ken says, "Well, Steve, you know how for a lot of families, mealtime is really just, it's frustrating because everybody's busy. And so it's really challenging to come up with healthy meals that everybody enjoys. Well, what I do is I'm an at-home chef, and I prepare meals that kids and parents love, that are healthy. And that means the family gets to spend more time together." Well, which of those do you think is going to be more compelling? I think Ken is going to be walking out with more business than Sue.
Mhm.
And the reason is because he started out with the problem. Well, you know how for a lot of families, mealtime is just frustrating. Well, if you're his audience, you're immediately going to go, "Yeah, I get that."
Mhm.
We have picky eaters, or everybody's busy. And so the time that it takes, and then he introduces what he does. And so what you do is much more interesting when you put it in context of the problem that you solve.
Right.
Okay. So if you go back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, the structure of story, you have a hero who has a problem. Well, think about your customer's problem. What is it? Write it down. Hopefully by now, if you go to my story brand and you start to fill some of that out, that's what you're doing. You're writing down what's the problem that they're facing in the context of what they want. So when you begin to explain that to people, you're communicating in a way that they're going, "Oh yeah, okay, that's relevant for me." So you start with a problem, keep it a sentence or two. You want to keep this brief. You want to be able to explain this while you're in the cocktail line at the networking event, or maybe you're at your kid's baseball game and you're talking to one of the other parents. You want to be able to communicate this clearly. So, well, you know what? I work with whoever it is and then introduce the problem. And then you introduce what you do. And so, AnnieLaurie, going back to what you asked me about earlier with the structure of story, what's the biggest challenge that people have? Well, sometimes, again, it's being too broad and trying to bring too many things to the table. Keep it simple. When you introduce your service, keep it one or two things. Don't try to explain the 10 different services that you provide. And then when you talk about success, what the benefit is, what you're doing is you're showing how you resolve the problem. And so in the case of the in-home chef, it could be, well, they get food that everybody enjoys and that's healthy. And that's satisfying the obvious problem. But then also, and now the family gets to enjoy time together. Or and now they're not arguing nearly as much. There's a lot less complaining. So those are some of the benefits that tie into more of the emotional level. And so that structure, problem, solution, result.
Right. And it invites the listener in, I think, too, because they're starting to connect with the problem and identify with it, and then start to see themselves in the story, which just solidifies it in their mind.
Absolutely. And the structure, again, we're not creating something new. The structure of story has been around, and even this problem, solution, benefit, result, that's not a new structure. People have been using that formula for a long time. And that's just as a sidebar. Sometimes people are trying to figure out how do I communicate on social media? Put your social media posts in that format. Introduce a problem. Talk about the solution. Talk about what the result looks like. And so, let's see if anybody has any comments or questions. We've covered a lot so far. We've gone through getting to know your customer, having those conversations. We've talked about the structure of story. We've talked about the one-liner. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I know Stephen Forrester, he likes the chalkboard background that you've got there, which is great. And Steve, I'm not quite. You mentioned a macro story. There are definitely lots of stories that happen kind of at the same time. And really, in the context of our brand, we want to focus on what's that primary story that we're inviting them into. And again, that goes to having clarity. Really, a lot of what we're trying to do is eliminate the confusion, eliminate the things that are irrelevant at this point.
It takes a lot of discipline to do what you're saying, because a lot of times when especially like if you started a business, you run your own business, you're passionate about that, and you want to really tell people, you want them to know and understand like so many things that matter to you. But unfortunately, you cannot say all that at one time. No one's going to remember it, and no one's going to see themselves as part of it, and they're going to zone out and you're going to lose them. So you have to discipline yourself to some extent to communicate like this, and to know that once you hook them in, then you can nurture that into that story over the course of time. But you have to be disciplined to be succinct in the beginning. That's hard to do for a lot of people. It's hard for me to do.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's why it's good to find somebody who can help you. I mean, have somebody that you can brainstorm with and can help you identify those things that really, no, that doesn't need to be in there. If you can say it in 6 words instead of 8, say it in 6. And oh goodness, I could talk about, there's so many other things that, just in terms of trying to help guide people in this. I'll say this and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Your one-liner. Okay. So Steve, why is this important? Why is a one-liner? How do I use this? Well, one, it gives you a great way to introduce what you do at an event. If you do a lot of networking, if you have salespeople who are having conversations, it gives you a way that's quick, it's concise, that tells people what you do. I've watched people as I've used this in conversations. It's fun to watch it because all of a sudden somebody's eyes light up. And when I've used our one-liner with people, I feel literally their eyes light up and they go, "We need to talk." It can be used on your website. It can be used on business cards. It can be used in an email signature. Have your team learn it, memorize it. Use that as you're having conversations. Again, it's creating simple messaging that's clear, it's compelling, it's consistent. AnnieLaurie, any final thoughts on any of this before I do a quick wrap up?
The reminder of we would love to do some of this with any of our listeners or viewers. If you want us to help walk you through it, do a quick coaching call, do a live, we can review your one-liner right here. Send it our way. We'd love to help showcase it. If you think you got a good one, let's show the people a great example. Just want to engage as many of you as possible. Take advantage of this opportunity to get some time and just focus on getting this right. Because if you can get this right now, it's going to benefit you for months to come.
I think it's worth noting, clarity does not happen on accident. You don't get there by happenstance. It does. It takes effort. It takes energy. And so, and it does, it sometimes it takes having somebody outside of yourself to give you some feedback. And so for our viewers, for our listeners, I would love to offer just free 30 minutes coaching, no sales pitch, nothing like that. Just having a conversation about your one-liner. If you want to talk more about the 7-part framework and how that works, great. My contact information is on the screen. You can reach me, Steve at wayfindmarketing.com. give me a call or shoot me a text, 901-300-6898. So you can get in touch with me. You can go through our website, wayfindmarketing.com. But I extend that because, again, sometimes it's really helpful to have that outside person give you some feedback. Now, this whole series, what we're in is this is number 2 of a 4-part series focused on how do you win more customers? Like, what are the basics? What are the fundamentals that businesses and nonprofits need right now, especially as a lot of folks are focused on survival? And it's also the foundation for being able to just hit the ground running when things start to bounce back. For a lot of people, your competitors are hunkering down. Now, some of you guys have competitors that are out there. They're taking advantage of this time. They're trying to be strategic. So the things that we're talking about today, clarifying your message. Next week, we're going to talk more about the website. We wrote a guide on this last year, 6 things that you can do on your website to win more business, win more customers, generate more leads. We're going to talk about that next week. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about the essentials of your sales funnel, your marketing, your online marketing and sales funnel to generate leads, to nurture those relationships. And we'll talk about the practical things there. And so those 3 things, really having a clear message, having your website be optimized and built in such a way that it's going to generate more leads, and then having a mechanism through that lead nurture campaign, that sales funnel, having that in place to capture and nurture leads, man, that is so fundamental, because if you're investing in getting people there, you want to make sure you have as many opportunities for them to understand with clarity what you do, why it matters, and what to do next. All right, man, I need to shut up. I've been talking a lot.
It's a good.
I am, because I know this works. And anytime I've talked to somebody about this in detail, their eyes light up and they go, wow, this just makes sense. I get it. And it changes the way people think. It changes the way we think about how to communicate. And it puts us in a place where we can communicate more clearly. All right. So if you've got any thoughts, any questions, again, you can get in touch with us. You can reach me directly, steve@wayfindmarketing.com.
Coming up on Tuesday.
Yes. So Tuesday, we are doing, so we're doing these live streams. We're doing these shows twice a week, Tuesdays, Fridays. Fridays are focused on marketing. Tuesdays are a little bit broader, but we're focused on leadership and business. Navigating Business is what we're calling that series. And on Tuesday, we're going to be joined by Jana Cardona. And Jana is the executive director for BNI Mid-South. So BNI is Business Networking International. And it's these groups all around the city. And she's her area is Memphis. It's down to kind of North Mississippi, down to Tupelo, and then up to Jackson, Tennessee. These are networking groups that meet weekly. I'm in the Germantown BNI group, and it's a great way to connect and meet with people. Well, a lot of people's businesses, growing their businesses, are dependent on networking and being able to connect with people. But obviously right now, networking, well, there's no events where I'd say the vast majority of us are under some sort of a shelter in place order. So on Tuesday, Jana's going to join us, and we're going to talk about how do we network. We've titled it "How to Network Like a Champ While We're All Stuck at Home." And so she and I have been talking about some ideas and ways to create some online networking events and opportunities to do some things to really help people connect and continue to be able to reach out through online channels. So join us Tuesday at noon Central Time, and we're gonna have some great conversation. And if anybody knows networking, it's Jana. And so please follow us on Facebook. You can like us there. You can go to our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube. So just type in Wayfind Marketing. Our channel will come up. Subscribe. You'll get notifications. Don't forget, we've got our daily marketing tips. You can find that on our website, wayfindmarketing.com. The web address is up on the screen right now. If you want more information about some of the upcoming live streams, wayfindmarketing.com/live. And the last thing I'll say is today is Good Friday, and I would be remiss if I didn't just point out that in the midst of everything that's going on right now, as much as we look for hope in our circumstances, sometimes the hope is really outside of our circumstances. And so really the hope that I have, the hope that I know you have, AnnieLaurie, and really the ultimate hope is in Christ. And so today is, of course, the day that we remember as Christians, the holiday. It was the day that Christ was crucified, and as he came in our place. And so as you know, the expression, it's Friday, but Sunday is on its way. So if anybody has questions about that, I would love the opportunity to talk to you about the hope that we have beyond our circumstances, because there is a greater hope. And really the reason that we do any of this to try to encourage and equip, it's because we do have hope because of what Christ has done. And so thank you for joining us, listeners, viewers. We do have this available. We always record these and we put them out as a podcast. So you can find us on Anchor FM. You can find us on Spotify. I think you can find us on Apple now. So the podcast is out there. Again, just search for Wayfind Marketing Live. Have a great weekend. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you and see you on Tuesday.